What's up, guys? My name is Ben Florsheim. I wanted to get on here and talk to you guys a little bit about my history, my background, where I came from, and a little bit more about me and the brand of Mind Body Build, some of the concepts and ideas that I had when coming up with this idea of this coaching community and some of the thoughts behind that. So a little bit about me. Growing up. Grew up in pretty average family. Was always was always provided for. Had a roof over my head. Had clothes on my back. Always had food. We was very cared for and loved for. Have very loving parents. I have a younger brother that's 2.5 years younger than me as well. But growing up, I felt like I was kind of always missing something. Kind of a hole in my soul, if you will. That's kind of what I correlate it to now, looking back. And what it was is, I didn't think super highly of myself. I didn't feel like I really fit in, and I wasn't in band, wasn't in sports, so I had trouble finding a group that I really kind of clicked with, that accepted me. And I found a group of kids that were smoking cigarettes one day after school, and all I had to do to hang out with them was start smoking cigarettes, and they accepted me. I always kind of acted out in school, acted out when I was younger. I was class clown all 4 years of high school, so I was always kind of searching, for my identity and searching for who I was. So when I found this group, that things kind of slowly progressed. I started smoking marijuana it was probably, on like a weekend basis, and then started smoking it every day, and then it was in between classes multiple times a day. And, that progressed into, I always talk about there being this invisible line. And I think that everybody is capable of crossing that invisible line. We just don't know when or how much or what will do it. Crossing that line into addiction. And I felt like I kind of crossed that line later into my freshman year, sophomore year, somewhere in there, when I started using on a multiple time per day basis. And it progressed from smoking marijuana into, drinking with friends, drinking during the week, using other substances until I finally found my drug of choice, which was Oxycontin. And it was my junior year. I started using Oxycontin intravenously. So I was shooting it up, and this was a multiple time, day, per day basis. And at that point, it was no longer about the group of friends. It was just about wanting to get high. And what that meant to me is everything else in my life went by the wayside. My parents always wanted me to get good grades, so to kind of keep my parents off my back, I ended up just cheating in all of my classes. And the reason I did that was so that I didn't have to worry about, getting my schoolwork done. I could just focus on what I wanted to focus on, which at the time was getting high. And, that's kind of the way things went, with the rest of my life as well. Nothing really mattered except for getting high. And when I turned 18, I kind of felt like I knew, when I turned 18 and wanted to go off to college, I graduated school with a 3.8 GPA, but I didn't have the knowledge base to back that, because when I took the SATs, which was, out of 1,600 at the time, I couldn't break 1,000. So I really, was only able to get into school because of my grades. And I kind of knew that there was somewhat of a problem going on, so I kind of, I guess it was kind of subconsciously, I ended up making a geographic at that point. I got accepted to school at University of Oregon, so I went off to school, and basically what happened is I changed my playmates and playthings, right? Within the first 2 weeks of being at school, I joined a fraternity, and I moved into that fraternity, And basically I was a chameleon. So I found this other group at this fraternity, and what they were doing was drinking and using cocaine. So what did I do? I started drinking and using cocaine. I also found out at the time that in college it was a lot harder to cheat than it was in high school. So basically what ended up happening was, every single term I was either on academic probation or off, or trying to get off academic probation. And so my fourth or fifth term, I think I was about a year and a half in, I was on academic probation 2 consecutive terms, and they said, you know what, we don't think this is the place for you. So they politely asked me not to return to school. So at that time I moved back to Tahoe, moved home with my folks. Within about a week of living back with my folks, I had a needle back in my arm. And my mom was walking the dog, and she caught me shooting up in the bathroom in their house. And at that point, my parents gave me an ultimatum. They said, hey, and what I realized today was that was one of the hardest decisions my parents ever had to make, because they kind of knew that at that point, depending on my decision, they were kind of signing my death warrant, because they gave me the ultimatum of, to either go to treatment or to move out. And at that point, as a lot of people know, and some people may not know, it really comes down to the addict, and if the addict is ready. And at that point, I wasn't ready. So for the next, 9 months to a year, I was couch surfing. I was living paycheck to paycheck, basically signing over my paycheck to whoever I was living with at the time, basically paying for rent and whatever drugs I could get with whatever was left over, basically just to keep me out of withdrawals. At this point in my addiction, I'm really no longer getting high. I'm just sustaining and using enough so that I don't go into withdrawals. So it was my 21st birthday. The day after my 21st birthday, I called my folks. I said, hey, I'm ready to go off to treatment. And I went to a 28-day program. And in that program, I learned a lot of, great tools. But unfortunately, when I went to that program, I was going for all of the wrong reasons. I went for everybody else. I went to, get my car back, get my parents back, get my, relationships back with my friends. I wasn't really doing it for me. So what ended up happening is I stayed clean and sober for 119 days. At that time, I made the decision that, hey, I was 21 and I felt like I was entitled to a drink. So the next day, I had a beer with lunch. And that lasted for about a week. And within a couple of weeks, I was drinking and using cocaine. Within a few weeks after that, I was drinking to oblivion, drinking to blackout. And one night I went out and drank, and I got in touch with one of my old buddies. And I knew at that point, I was drunk enough to know that the booze wasn't quite doing what I wanted it to do. And I knew that my buddy had what would take me to that next level. And he ended up having heroin, and I ended up shooting up heroin in his car in a parking lot. And I overdosed at that point. So my buddy pulled me out of the car, dumped water all over me to try and wake me up. I was non-responsive. He ended up calling 911, which I'm super grateful for, because I hear a lot of stories all the time about people, just leaving people and people dying from an overdose. And that night I was super lucky that he called, for an ambulance. And at that point I was still really had that addict mentality. Because when those paramedics showed up, they shot me up with Narcan. There were cops there. There were cops shining lights in my eyes. And, I was pretty disgusted with these people that had just saved my life, honestly. And, they treated me like a gutter addict, like I was. And they rushed me to Tahoe Truckee Med. Tahoe Truckee Med released me at about 3 o'clock in the morning. And I remember If anybody's familiar with that area, I remember, the nurse said, "Hey, do you want me to call you a cab?" I said, "No, I'll walk home." At that point, I was about 13 miles away from home. And I remember walking through the mouse hole in Truckee, picking these heart monitor stickers off my chest, and really coming to that realization that, hey, this was it, and that was the bottom that I needed to reach for myself to take that next step. And since it was July 1st of 2008, I've been clean and sober. And so over the past 10 years, I've been able to, help, hundreds, if not thousands of people, whether it's directly or indirectly, right? Because over, the first 6, 7 years, actually really, the whole time that I've been, clean and sober, I have attended middle schools, individual classes, I've gone to high schools and gone to individual classes as well, and done, speaking events, spoken at assemblies, and at the UNR campus, I was able to speak to a number of classes with students that were learning about addiction. So, I've really been able to share my story and really help. And over the last 10 years, I've been able to accomplish some of those things that I wasn't able to accomplish. Like, I was able to go back to school, and going back to school was a huge fear for me, because I equated school with partying. So what I did is I went to a junior college. I took one class while I was working, and I got a 4.0 in that class. And then the next term, I took 4 classes at that junior college, and I got a 4.0, and I got straight A's in all those classes. So at that point, I was able to transfer into UNR, which was not an easy feat, because I transferred into UNR with a 1.7 GPA, and a lot of bad credits, behind that. Took a lot of phone calls and a lot of letters to get accepted in there, and I graduated with a bachelor's degree, and I graduated with a 2.9. So going from a 1.7 to a 2.9 was a huge accomplishment for me. So also in the past, in 2000, there's a lot to it, right? In 2012, I finished school. I got my real estate license. I sold new homes for a new home builder, and just kind of didn't really feel like it was my passion. I did really well at it. I was successful at it. And from there, I started my first business, which was a home flipping company. I was, rehabbing homes and flipping those. I was successful at that. Again, just didn't really feel like it was my passion. I was good at it, but just kind of didn't fill what I wanted it to. In 2014, I made the decision that, hey, I didn't just get sober to get sober. I got sober to change my life. And the next step, what that looked like for me, the next step was was my own personal health and wellness. 2014, I got my blood, my cholesterol tested, and it was outrageously high. I was not sleeping well. I was not eating well. Didn't look very good. I didn't feel very good. So I wanted to change. I wanted to do something about it. So I made a commitment over that next year to change my nutrition and to start exercising 5 to 6 days a week. And through that next year, it wasn't an easy feat, but I accomplished what I set out to do. And I dropped my cholesterol over 100 points. I started looking better. I started feeling better. Started sleeping better. And it's something that's kind of stuck with me, and something that I felt like I really enjoyed and I loved and I had a lot of passion for. And in 2017, I did the next extreme. I competed in my first bodybuilding show, and the extreme dieting, the extreme gym life, and I took second place at the 2017 Best of the West in Reno, Nevada. And then